Awesome. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Prabhu. I actually work for the gentleman who was here just a couple minutes ago. I'm a technical public cloud specialist at VMware. I focus on all cloud services. And so just before we get started, how many folks actually use an Alexa at home? Super. Very cool. How many use Network Insight from VMware? Okay. Super. So what I want to do in the next 15 minutes or so is to actually walk you through a couple steps of how do you actually build, a little bit of how you build a skill and how you actually tie that to a Network Insight API, right? So nothing specific on any specific product as such, but just wanted to walk you through how the skill works, and if you guys have questions, I'll be around here. Just hit me up. Ooh, someone wants something, looks like. Super. Just some quick acknowledgements. I'm by no means a developer. I've recently started back to coding, so I used a lot of help from a lot of people. So I want to call out a few people who actually helped me through this process. Big thanks to one of the Alexa evangelists. I know I'm going to send this video to him later on, and he made sure that I put his name up. So he's one of the Alexa evangelists on the East Coast, so if you ever need anything, reach out to him on Twitter. That's his Twitter handle. The idea for this session actually came from one of the European SEs, and obviously my wife, who let me actually hack away at this thing for time and time again. And also, like I said, I'm not a developer by any means, so Google, GitHub, Stack Overflow, they let me borrow, steal code as I needed. So I know you guys are probably waiting to see how this actually works. So I'm going to actually start with a demo right off the bat, and I'll kind of come back and tie all of it together, if that's okay with everyone, right? So let's actually go and look at how this whole thing actually gets set up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you a little recording because I wasn't sure how the Wi-Fi is going to be here. So this is going to be fairly visible for you guys. So the way you do this is basically go into the Alexa developer portal and you give it a skill name at this point, right? The first thing you do is you do a skill name and you say, I want to call it, in this case, I'm going to call it VCS Alexa. That's just a skill name I'm going to use. There are a couple of important things that we need in order for us to create any skill. This is just any skill out of the world. You want to create this for something else at home, this is exactly the same procedure you will kind of go through, right? So you go ahead and you give it an invocation name. So what is an invocation name? Invocation name is like whenever you say, Alexa, open something. So that's an invocation name that we're going to leverage, right? So I'm going to just call this thing VCS in this case. And then I'm going to start creating some intents. So what are intents? Intents are basically, think of intents as like you want Alexa to do something with it. So that's basically an intent that I'm going to do. So in this case, I'm going to give it, basically I'm going to create 3 intents in this demo, right? First one I'm going to call it is VM intent. Basically what it does is it goes and looks up instances in Network Insight, gives me a number of how many instances I have. I'm going to create one called VKE intent, which is basically going to go and tell me what my cluster name is in the Kubernetes engine. And I'm going to create another one which is going to tell me how many apps I have in my Network Insight application, right? So I'm going to create those things. So in order for me to create an intent, the second thing I need is a utterance. Utterance is basically what the user is going to say. So when you say, Alexa, go and do this, that's the utterance. So you give it a bunch of utterances, it basically will be able to figure out what is the text that the user is speaking, right? So I'm going to create only one utterance, but in theory, you would actually create a bunch of things to create a more natural language kind of experience for when you're trying to create a skill. So I'm going to just create an intent and go and say, hey, give me what the thing is called and what my utterance is going to actually look like. So I'm going to just copy paste that and say, what is my VKE cluster name, for example, in my utterance at this point. So here I'm simply just creating the intents, right? So those are the 2 main things that I've created so far. I've created an invocation name, and I've created an intent, and what the utterance is going to look like. So 3 things that I've created so far. So at this point, I've just created all those basic parameters at this point, right? I need to still go and create a few other things. So I need to go and create a way for the intents to match up with actions, right? So that's the next step I need to now kind of go and do. So that is what I'm going to create using a Lambda function here. So in order for me to create that, I go into the endpoint configuration, and I copy the skill ID that I've created here. This is going to map to a Lambda function that's going to trigger every time I need to go and create something. So here I'm just going to create a Lambda function that's called VCS Alexa. Just call it whatever, right? And this is all written in Node.js. And I'm going to map it to an existing IAM policy, a role that is going to be needed to execute the functions at this point. And I'm going to add a trigger for the function to actually run. The trigger is going to be coming from the Alexa skill itself that I've created there, right? And that's how I map the skill ID with the Lambda function that I need to run at this point. So once I've done that, I go ahead and upload the code that I have. The code is basically everything that it needs, the intelligence that it needs to actually execute the intents and how they map together and all that fun stuff I need to do, right? So I'm going to compress this file, and I'm going to basically upload it to the Lambda function. So Lambda function is just going to take the code. Here I'm going to basically take that, and I'm going to upload that zip file that I need to put for the Lambda function to actually run. Here I'm going to hit save, and once I hit save, I'm going to also get a ARN, the Amazon resource name for the Lambda function that maps to the one that I've created here, and I need to go and provide that to the skill. So it's kind of both ways, right? So once I've created the Lambda function, I go back to my skill and I paste it there. So now basically my skill itself is built, right? I saved it. My skill is built. My Lambda function is built. One thing I need to do here is actually I need to go and build it now. So I'm going to go back into my skill itself, and I'm going to hit the build model thing. So you can see on the right side, it actually tells you exactly like how all the steps that need to get done. So there are 4 main things that you need to do. One is the invocation name that we added, the intent, and now I need to build the model, and I've obviously set up the endpoint, right? So I'm going to build the model on the other side while I'm going to switch back to the Lambda function. I'm going to test it out to see if it actually fires at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, I want to test the Alexa start session. Just give it some name, call it test or whatever, and create. And I hit test. It basically will run the start or the launch function that is defined. The launch function basically, in my case, is just a text readout. It's just going to say, every time I say, Alexa, open this, it's going to go ahead and say, yes, welcome to something, right? That's what it's going to do. Now, in order for me to monitor it, I've set up a bunch of console logs in the code. So every time that fires, I can go into CloudWatch and kind of see how the events are actually firing in there, right? So now, by the time I actually flip back now, the skill is almost built, and an Alexa developer console actually lets you go and test it without actually having an Alexa device. So you can actually just do keystrokes, and you can actually test the skill. This is super, super helpful to actually build out. When you're testing the skill, it gives you a lot of good information that you can look at it, right? So what I'm going to do is now, actually, I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to do this thing in a way that you guys now start following how this comes together. When I just say open VCS, it's going to say, welcome to the Alexa service. What can I do for you? I'm going to say, hey, Alexa, open VCS and ask how many instances. Now you see how these 2 things are coming together, right? Now when I say that, it's going to go run an API call on the back end and say, hey, you have 350 instances in Network Insight. Now next time around, I want to say, hey, Alexa, open VCS and what is my cluster name in VKE? When I run that command, it runs an API to the VKE cluster, and it tells, hey, your name is prod4 that you've specified. Once you say, hey, open VCS and how many apps do I have in Network Insight, it'll basically now go and run another API call and say you have 13 applications in Network Insight. So you can basically write this to do pretty much whatever you want. You can tell it to go build me a cluster, go and build an application in Network Insight. You can do pretty much ask it to do whatever you want. So I'm just showing you 2 or 3 couple of super simple examples for you to do. And now you see I can actually go back and map that in my CloudWatch logs, and I can figure out, hey, what are the actual API calls that are actually going on in there, right? So now that you've seen that, let's actually flip back and see how these guys kind of came together, right? So first and foremost, right, I hope you guys take my GitHub, go to my GitHub page, download this guy, use it, tell me what's broken, and it's actually pretty useful for you guys. So github.com/my full name. So a couple of things you need in order for you to get started with this thing. So first thing is obviously you need a Network Insight service or VKE. So if you don't have a VKE service, find me. I'll give you a card. Go and trial our Kubernetes engine. Getting started is super, super easy. It's very easy. But the other thing is once you get the service itself, you need some data sources. In our case, you need either vCenter, AWS workload, something. You need some data sources in there to basically give you something. On the AWS side of the house, in order for you to run this, you'll need obviously your free tier account of some kind, an AWS account, and you also need an AWS developer account. There's 2 separate things that you need to go register for. Both are free. But Lambda functions are super cheap. They do cost money every now and then, but it's super, super cheap. It's not going to make any dent. And I really want to hear from you guys, like what we can actually add to this, take out from this, and if you guys take this and build it further, send it back to me. I would like to see how this actually did actually work for you guys, right? So how does the Network Insight API work? So let's actually look at that for a second. So there's a full API available for Network Insight. So I'll show you the page where you can actually go and look at the API and how you can use it. There are a couple of things that we need in order for you to actually do this, get started with this. So a couple of things are, you need obviously an authentication token, which is like any other SaaS-based service. You need that authentication service that you'll pull from our Cloud Services console, and you would exchange the token for a user access token. So that's one of the things. And all of this is documented, by the way. I'm just listing it out so that you guys are aware of this. And when we pass the API call, and you can test this out in Postman if you want, you basically pass the API call and you say, I want to also pass the auth token along with it. That's literally what you need to pass at this point. So let's take a quick look at the interaction model, right? So you guys kind of probably have a sense of what it kind of looked like already. But basically, if you look at the far left, you have your Alexa device itself. You have your Alexa device. Then you have the voice service. The big blue bubble, that the cloud-looking thing there, is basically your developer console that you're actually going and starting to build it from. The blue circle that's inside the CloudFormation template is the skills kit. Amazon has actually done a phenomenal job of actually building a skills kit for you. So you can actually go to their GitHub page, download the Ask Alexa SDK, and just build on top of it. So I'll show you the code of how it's built. That's literally how it's actually been built. So they've actually done a lot of work for us already. All we need to do is actually go Google it or find the right code on Stack Overflow, and you're pretty much off to the races. So Lambda function is actually what is actually doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So all the API calls that I'm actually hitting are actually going from that Lambda function there. And then the Lambda execution role is what is actually allowing you to do this. So just to kind of wrap it up here, all of these things kind of come together with these basically 4 main things in the skills kit, right? One is the invocation name, which is what I call VCS. The intent, which is what would you like me to do? That is basically what it's triggering. The utterance, which is basically what are the keywords or sentences I need to trigger an intent. And then the execution itself. The execution is kind of divided into mainly 3 things. There are more, but just for the sake of our purposes, there are mostly 3 that we need to keep track of. One is the launch request. That's a predefined function in the skills kit, where you can say, if the launch request is this, I want you to do X, right? And then the intent request is what you can map to an intent. And then there are helpers. You can add, obviously, custom helpers to basically say if voice command doesn't make sense, I can add put in some aid and helpers and things of that nature. So I'll give you a quick rundown of the code, and if you want to hang around and pour through what this code actually looks like, there's basically a couple of main things that I want to highlight here, right? You see the launch request up here. Basically, that's what maps to the Speak SDK, and it tells us the Speak output should be this is what it's going to prompt you. I've created some handlers where it says if the intent request maps to app's intent, I'm going to run a certain set of code, and that's what I've basically done 3 times over at this point. So it's pretty straightforward. If you want to dig through how this code is actually built, I'll be around. So I'm looking at the clock, and it tells me I have about a minute left. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Appreciate the time, and hopefully you'll take this code, make it better. Thank you. Appreciate it.